Ladies and gentlemen, I'm call this meeting to order of the Mayor and Board of Commissioners from May 24th, 2022. Can I have the roll call, please?
Yes, Commissioner Braun,
Here.
Commissioner Pearson,
Here.
Commissioner Warren. Let the record show you do have a quorum.
Thank you. Will you rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In light of the tragedy in Uvalde, Texas, I am asking for a moment of silence in honor of those that lost their lives in that senseless tragedy earlier today. Thank you. First on the agenda is Resolution 2022-10, the leasing of public works vehicles. Town Administrator, do you have that?
Yes, I do. So essentially what this is, if you remember, I think it was 2 meetings ago, we had you pass a resolution that would allow us to do 2 things. Number one was to cover the cost of a new replacement police vehicle for the police department, and then to also reimburse the town on a previous purchase of a dump trailer for the Public Works Department, and then a new vehicle for the code officer's position. So that resolution basically was a resolution to move forward with tax-exempt leasing, which is how we get our vehicles for the town of Rising Sun. We've been doing it for several years and have been very happy with them. We needed to pass that resolution to not only authorize us to move forward with the financing of all of those 3 vehicles, but to make it known that we were going to be reimbursing for previous expenses related to the code officer's vehicle and the dump trailer for Public Works. However, as we were going into this year's budget cycle, we have 2 additional police cars that you're going to find in the budget going forward in a couple minutes where we cover that. We're covering the cost of 2 police cars in some additional financing that has not, all the details have not been worked out. That'll be carried in the budget. But we also need a new public works vehicle replacement. And the state bid, and Chief, correct me if I'm wrong on this, I believe that the state contract had vehicles using basically 2020 financing numbers. The vendors bid using late 2020 pricing or early 2021 pricing on police cars and public works vehicles. In order to get that pricing for the police cars, I believe you had to have your order in by like February of this year or something like that.
The window was very small. It was only
Yeah.
a few days.
Right. So we missed that opportunity, but we found out to get 2020 pricing on the public works vehicles, we have until June 9th of this year. So our idea is that instead of incurring the 12 to 15% markup on a vehicle by having it go out to bid with the state again and have to wait for that marked up price, let's take advantage of the old pricing that's still good until June 9th. So what you have in front of you is a resolution that is essentially needed to modify that original tax-exempt leasing to add an additional $60,000 for a new public works vehicle to include everything. We always outfit them with the snow plow, the lights and stuff like that. But the important thing is we're doing it now so that we can see a significant savings in cost as opposed to waiting till after July 1st.
Now, are we replacing it completely, or are we replacing it with creating a reserve?
I'm not sure I followed
Okay.
that.
Are we replacing the vehicle 1 for 1 and the vehicle goes out of our service?
We'll probably use the old one and put it in reserve.
Put it in reserve?
Yes, yeah. Because the other thing that, you know, I'll cover, we're gonna cover in more detail, but it ties all the loose ends, is in the past, we've always budgeted for a fifth Public Works employee. We're not going to be doing that this year. But they always like to have vehicles set aside for like yard waste, it's all hooked up, ready to go, you know, that kind of stuff. So what it will be replacing will be going into reserve. And then the other thing that I'll say, just for clarification purposes, is that our vehicles are assigned to employees. And we have one employee who has been contemplating retirement. He has reached retirement age. He currently is assigned the 5-ton, or I'm sorry, the 2-ton, 3-ton dump truck. And if he were to retire completely, we wouldn't want a new replacement employee driving that kind of vehicle. It's fortunate this employee lives in the town of Rising Sun. We don't put a whole lot of wear and tear on that vehicle. Whereas if we got a new replacement Public Works employee, that person could live in Northeast Elkton, whatever. So when we go through those transitions in the future, we will, you know, we'll have the vehicles to, we'll have the right sequence of vehicles, I guess it makes sense.
Okay.
So that's what this resolution is about.
Can you go ahead and read that into the record, Town Administrator?
Okay, so Town of Rising Sun Resolution 2022-10, Public Works Vehicle Equipment and Leasing. I'll skip through the 3 boilerplates at the beginning. Whereas I go to the fourth whereas the mayor and commissioners have determined that a true and very real need exists for the acquisition and replacement of a heavy-duty 4-wheel drive pickup truck and ancillary equipment for the Public Works Department at a cost not to exceed $60,000. Whereas the mayor and commissioners, after thorough research and investigation, has determined that leasing this vehicle and ancillary equipment with the option to own at some point provides the best financial benefit to the town. And whereas in order to secure this leasing, the leasing company has requested that a formal resolution be adopted detailing this initiative. Therefore, let it be resolved that the mayor and commissioners hereby approve the entering into a contract with the leasing company and hereby designates and authorizes the town administrator, Calvin A. Bonenberger Jr., to execute and deliver the contract on the town's behalf with such changes thereto as deemed appropriate and related documents, including any escrow agreement necessary to the consummation of the transaction contemplated by the contract. And be it further resolved that the mayor and commissioners of the town of Rising Sun pass, approved, and adopted this resolution on the 24th day of May, 2022, and this was reviewed and approved for legal sufficiency by the town attorney on May 20th.
Is there a motion for Resolution 2022-10?
I make a motion for the approval of Resolution 2022-10.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion regarding this resolution? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next on the agenda is a budget presentation. Town Administrator, do you have that?
Yes, I do. So, before we get into the actual budget, I always like to keep everybody up to date on the historical perspective of the town, but I think there are some salient points that need to be glossed over or touched on really quick here. So what I have up on the screen is basically a matrix of the assessed value of all properties in the town of Rising Sun, starting back in 2005. So just to real quickly, we get, as you're aware, we get a document every year around March that talks about what the total assessed value of all the properties in the town of Rising Sun are going to be. And every incorporated government gets these. The county gets one, Port Deposit gets one, Northeast, so forth and so on. And so what you're looking at on this column B right here is basically starting back in 2005, and I'm going to highlight, I'm not going to go into every number, but I want to highlight because you can see, I'm going to say it this way, you can see the benefits of good water and sewer and public utilities in terms of getting people to invest in their properties, build new properties, invest new businesses in town. So when you look in 2005, the total assessed value of all properties in the town of Rising Sun was $117,247,591. So that's 2005 there. You go up to 2010, which basically is the apex of the highest point in which our properties were valued in the town of Rising Sun. So in 2010, the value was $222,260,213. And then this is giving you, this column right here is basically telling you the percentage of change from one year to the next on what those assessed values are doing. Now, this column here is that whatever your assessed value is projected to be in March, the next March, you get the new projected value for the coming year, but you also get what the actual assessed value was from the prior year. So you can compare what was projected versus what essentially the final determination was. So when I use that first scenario here, you will see that the projected value was, again, 117 million there, but it ended up coming in at $131 million, you know, by the end of the year. So all these numbers go towards what our real estate tax is going to be that we are going to bring in. So, and this here is just a percentage change in what the actual numbers were compared to the actual year-to-year actual numbers. So in other words, when the state is doing its best shot at giving a guess of what the value is going to be, you see the 21%, 18%, 9% change from year to year in prediction, but the actual number is reflected over here in 9%, 8%, 7%, 6%. So the window starts to narrow because now you're more or less looking at real numbers of what they were. And then this here basically gives you that percentage in terms of the increase in total value. So you're looking at a $24 million increase, a $25 million increase, and so on. And so then here, I just wanted to do a little analysis on the accuracy of the state because it is a very interesting methodology that they use. And for the most part, you can see that there, in many cases, within the most difficult year was, at the beginning, a 12.3% change, 10.10. I thought I saw, 4.57. But from that point forward, they've been basically under 1 percentage point in terms of accuracy. So you can sort of rely on that number from a budgeting standpoint. The other thing that I wanted to show you was that what we budgeted last year, the projected tax yield for last year's budget was going to be $962,563. We actually brought in we're supposed to bring in $945,197,000. We don't, when we budget, we don't budget for a full 100% of what is projected to come in. I use up 99% of what is projected to come in. So this year we're balancing the budget with the idea that we're going to bring in $952,937 of real estate tax, where we budgeted last year, we used a number of $930,231. So basically what I'm saying is from what we budgeted last year to what we're budgeting this year, we have an increased projected revenue of $22,706 of which to work with. The other thing that I wanted to do is to show you sort of the ebb and flow of the tax reductions that you have done over the last couple of years. As we talked about before, the town of Rising Sun is really the only community in the county that's actually lowered its tax rate over the last couple of years. There are some communities that might drop down for the constant yield tax rate to match that, but we've actually physically went further and lowered it on occasion. So those are numbers here. And the other thing that I wanted to show you is in 2018, our tax rate was 48 cents per $100 of value. We lowered it to 47, and then we lowered it to 46, and that is where we have kept it. So with those, and here on the right-hand side, you see the numbers that we use for budgeting. So in 2018, we budgeted $897,000 of real estate tax, and this year we're going to be budgeting $952. So it sort of gives you a 5-year snapshot of how we're doing the budgeting from that standpoint. The other thing that I wanted to show you is that in your efforts to lower the tax rate, and remember when we went into COVID, we wanted to lower the tax rate because nobody knew what COVID was going to do to our residents. So we wanted to be ahead of the curve, lower the tax rate, and tighten up our budget to make sure that we were relatively prepared for whatever the unknowns of COVID may or may not be. So because we lowered the tax rate from 48 cents to 46 cents, it's actually yielded $142,007.82 of less real estate tax over that period of time. And that translates into basically an across-the-board reduction of 3.8% reduction in the amount of real estate tax that we have collected. Now, that doesn't mean that every resident realized 3.8% because that's driven by the fluctuations of your assessed value of your property. But across the board, those reductions have saved our taxpayers 3.8% or $142,000 of real estate tax savings over that snapshot of time. So again, you guys have worked very hard to, one, keep your budget in line and keep the perspective of your constituents in mind too. So I wanted to show you what that looks like over that period of time. The next item here is to actually get into the budget presentation. And as we do, you guys know the layout on this. If you have any questions, you can just look at the column on the left-hand side and say, hey, I have a question on line 1, line 5, whatever. You don't have to worry about the account numbers. It's broken down into 10 individual departments in the general fund. Those create cost centers so that we can really track what each department costs for the town of Rising Sun. And we currently have a surplus in the general fund of $6,074. So in the past, we've always talked about, because of the constraints that the town had over the sewer and water, and we're going to look at that in a second, because of the constraints that the town has had, we don't get the luxury of balancing our budget with large surpluses. So that's one thing I want to make sure we follow. The second thing is that in order to keep the processes moving smoothly, we will budget for things that we might not necessarily spend. And what we do is we will show a transfer from our rainy day fund to cover that. So let me give you an example. There are things like, you know, fixing the roof on the building. We were getting estimates of $60,000 to fix the roof on the building. And so the way we've done the budget in the past is that we're going to try, because our margins are close. Again, I talk about the water and sewer and not having the investments until recently, that in order to achieve some of the things that we have achieved over the last 10 years, we've had to be creative and very aggressive and sort of calculating some reasonable risk in order to pave streets. And I'll give, you know, just to put it in perspective, we've been talking here about real estate tax of $900,000. We're almost at our apex of 2010, where we brought in the most real estate tax at that time period, and that was at a much lower real estate tax rate, because in 2010, the real estate tax rate was 36 cents per for $100 of value. The point I'm getting at is when you consider the streets that we pave in town, and we do them in lumps, that all comes out of your real estate tax. At times, we are spending upwards of $600,000 to $900,000 to pave those roads. In the past, the town used to just come out of its pocket for $150,000 and pave one road. What we've been doing is taking that $150,000 and turning it into 10-year financing on debt service, so that we can pave a larger number of roads and spread it out over a 10-year period. So despite the fact, and I go back to what I was showing earlier, despite the fact that we have seen significant reductions in the assessed values of properties from 2010 to 2016, we've talked about it being a 51% reduction in money coming in. Despite that fact, we, since 2008, have probably done 4 or 5 paving projects of more than $500,000, with some of them being $800,000 and $900,000. And when you look at that from the 10,000-foot view, you would say, wow, how are you going from real estate tax revenue of $900,000 in 2010 to $766,000 in 2015, but still doing very aggressive paving? It's because we're trying to be creative and do some financing to get what the residents need in terms of streets. And for the most part, all of our streets have been paved over that period of time. The other thing we've done, as you recall in the past, is if the town needed to buy a backhoe or a dump truck, it would come out of its pocket, just in cash flow that. But we decided a long time ago, like in 2016, that it did not make sense to be paying a contractor $50,000 to come in and pave, let's say, 500 lineal feet of sidewalk, when we could take that same $50,000, turn it into equipment financing over a 10-year period, and buy our public works people the dump trucks and the jackhammers and the backhoes that they need to do that in-house. And so you take what I always call your 9-to-5 labor that you're always going to be paying for anyway, and instead of paying a contractor $50,000 to come in, you spread that creatively in financing and get your people the equipment they need, so that really the only out-of-pocket expense you have in the case of sidewalks is the cost for concrete. So what I'm getting at is we've been able to accomplish a lot of things over the years by the way we do the budgets. But I've always said in the past that that is why we need to get the infrastructure up and running. Because infrastructure, if you remember Secretary Grumbles from MDE when he came to the Chester Water thing, I forget exactly what he said, but it had basically to do with when you have water, you will prosper and grow. That water is life from an economic development standpoint. So getting the water and sewer infrastructure in the ground and completed was a monumental achievement for the town, because now going forward, we can start to get a little bit of relief from how we try to do the budgets, and not sort of be close to the edges as we are. So with that, I'm going to say one of the problems we're running into this year, which everybody is inflation and the cost of everything. It's going through the roof in every category that we have. So when we talk about having expenses that we're going to bring in rainy day funds if we want to do it, we have committed to doing those expenses. We've taken out the ones that were like, okay, objectively, we're not going to do it, like the new public works garage down at the sewer plant. We've rolled, that was a $260,000 line item that we were carrying. We've taken those items out, but we still have some rainy day fund transfers coming in to, one, achieve what you want to achieve in terms of providing services for your residents, whether it be spectacular, spooktacular events, whether it be Winterfest. You know, those are all hugely successful, but they cost the town a lot of money to put those on. Sunfest is another thing. The town spends an enormous amount of money, rightfully so, providing the police and the public works and the staffing for those types of events. All those costs are going up, you know, as we speak in doing all that. So the more we can bring in, invest in our infrastructure, the more the economy in the town will grow organically and grow by itself. And we can get a little bit of relief. But our margins are getting really, really tight in here. So we have inflation. The other thing that we have in here is it's not a secret that law enforcement, whether you're in law enforcement or you're trying to provide law enforcement, has become incredibly expensive right now because of changes in law to bring about law enforcement accountability. Good, bad, or indifferent, that is increased costs in that. Not everybody wants to be a police officer anymore. So we, like a lot of communities, anyone listening on YouTube has seen it enough, through Cecil County has lost a lot of officers through attrition from other rival, I shouldn't say rival, but other community police departments. And the only way you can combat that is to make it more attractive to be there. So in order for us to maintain our law enforcement, we've had to do some significant things to make these positions more attractive. So you have some cost increase there, and we have to buy vehicles for them. We're not adding new police officers. We've just gone, Chief, what's it been, maybe 4 or 5 years understaffed for the most part. And although we have not replaced the police vehicles in a timely manner in the past, simply because we had nobody to drive those vehicles. So we don't have vehicles that are only 5 years of age that you can just give to a new officer. Our vehicles are much older, and they do have some wear and tear. So we need to get, that. Not to steal all the chief's thunder, but he's reported to you guys in the past, getting uniforms is even more difficult because of changes in regulations and colors and stuff like that and cost. Ammunition has gone through the roof. Certification training, the stuff that you need to do for the law enforcement to keep them where they need to be. The police department is just one example of how these costs are trickling down through all the departments. So our margins are tight. And we do have a reserve fund transfer coming in to the to pay for all this of $380,000. Now that's if absolutely everything in a worst case scenario comes true that we have to do. That's what that $380,000. we carry these transfers every year. We've never had to go into a reserve fund transfer. I'm not sure if we're gonna have to this year. I'm just saying that the margins are much closer this year because of all the things that I have said. So in the general fund, we're still making nice allocations for the community promotions, the things that make people feel good about living in the town of Rising Sun, in addition to, you know, the lower tax rate. Again, I say this all the time, we have the second lowest tax rate per person in Rising Sun in all of Cecil County. When you take our population and divide it by the amount of real estate tax we have coming in, it is the second lowest in all of Cecil County. We have, not to jump completely into the proprietary fund, but when you talk about our sewer and water rate, we say this every year, is that we do our sewer and water rate a little bit different than other communities do. We have payment plans, we try to work with people, but we also bill on a 1,000-gallon increment, with 1,000 gallons being the minimum base, whereas other communities might have 7, 8, 10,000 gallons as a minimum base, which means that in our community, you can control how much you're gonna pay for your water and sewer by just being mindful and conservative with the water that you use. So what that means is you can translate that into when you're talking about your senior citizens living in this community who typically don't use a lot of water, maybe 2,500, 2,000 gallons a month is all a senior will use. They're at a community that's gonna just bill them for that 2,000 gallons, not another community that might bill them for 4,000 or 5,000 or 7,000, whether they use it or not. So although our rates are high, we've always tried to put the power back in the hands of the end user to be able to control what that impact is going to be on them. And other communities don't do that, quite frankly. So moving down through the list, a lot of the, we've really cut back on capital outlay. There is a renovation that we do have in the budget for the police department downstairs. They are grossly outgrowing their space with what they need to be doing. I talked about changes in law enforcement and how they have to deal with people. They're just too crammed down there. So we have money set aside in there, $36,000 to renovate the downstairs area to make them more in line with the expectations of what they need to be doing. We have already updated our website as much as we need to update it, so we don't have those one-time expenses coming forward. Our staffing has become very stabilized, so we're not carrying the third-party clerical assistance that we used to have to do in the past as a separate line item. We were able to cut that out. Down here into the police department, and I'm just gonna jump here, I'm looking at, what do I wanna show you here? We have ample money. We're obviously gonna have an increase in here because we're hiring 2 police officers, so our uniform stuff is gonna go up. Equipment for those officers is gonna go up a little bit, so you see some increases in there. Going into code enforcement, in the past, you always notice in the past, we had much higher revenue projections in code enforcement. And the reason why we had much higher revenue projections is we always wanted to be ready that when the water and sewer were resolved and we had people building, that we had the revenue items reflective of that. And we always knew that we would need to hire a code officer to be able to do that. So for the last 3 or 4 years, we've carried a code officer in the budget, but we have looked to use most of that expense paid for by the building permits and all that we would be bringing in. We are now on the cusp of that actually happening, which is the reason why we move forward with the code officer. One, because of a lot of property maintenance issues we're having. You remember 2 meetings ago, I showed you all the mold and some of the deplorable conditions that people are living in. We need to be enforcing those types of things. So we're now on the cusp of starting to realize the actual building permit fees coming in, because we have roughly 400 residential houses that are in various stages of presenting plans to our planning commission to get approvals. Now, those 400 houses are not going to happen over a year's time. I'm predicting that those 400 houses, just given the way it's a little bit more difficult to build a house and get it under roof and through the process, it used to be like 90 days. It sounds like it's getting a little bit closer to between 140 and 180 days for that. I can remember when I first started out in code enforcement, you could have 100 home subdivision that every month would issue a UNO certificate to 5 or 6 houses at a time, because they had more workers available. You could have 5 different plumbers working on 5 different residential houses at the same time. Now you have 1 plumbing outfit, 1 mechanical outfit, 1 electrical outfit. The other thing that's different in the code world is, I'm just going to use a fictitious name, the ABC construction company might have had their own framers, their own electricians, their own mechanical guys, their own plumbing guys in years past. Now you could be a GC and build a house and buy the land, say you're going to build the house, pull the permit, and you might never swing a hammer, because you're just going to subcontract that out to all the subcontractors to do it. Well, there just aren't enough to go around for these developers to be issuing 5 and 6 certificate of occupancies a month. I think we're probably going to settle into around maybe 1 or 2. So I'm sort of looking at maybe in a year's time, maybe 20 to 24 new residential houses coming on board, and that number might be a little bit high. So the reason why I tell you that is we've taken sort of a guess at what the revenue could be. We might be coming back next year and have a much different number that could be a lot more money coming in, because we got to get a feel for what the development community is going to be able to do. There's really no changes in public works. One of the things I mentioned in one of my presentations, we had always carried the hiring of a 5th public works employee. And the reason why I always wanted to do that is whenever our guys are working on the street for a variety of reasons, it always has, it makes sense to have at least 3 people. Now, there's many times where you're going to need more than that. But to me, I've always felt comfortable working out on the street of at least having 3. Going from 4 to 5 would give you that cushion that we're getting employees that are here longevity-wise, so they get a little bit more vacation time. And it can become a hassle to try to schedule your workflow when you're trying to work around vacations and to maintain that 3 people. And we have an excellent work crew now. It's been growing, it's getting much better, and there's more projects we would like to take on. But one of the things that's holding us back is available manpower. So as much as I would have liked to have carried and executed that 5th public works employee, because of all the inflation and everything I'm talking about, I had to roll that out. So we're not carrying that 5th employee in anywhere in the public works department. Streets and sidewalks, we're not looking, and I want to say this with a caveat, we're not looking to take on any new streets and sidewalks financing, because we still have Pearl Street and Mount Street left over from the financing that we already secured last year. So we have money left in that financing that when we get the new water lines in the ground and the broadband, we're just gonna tap into that existing financing to pay for that. So I'm not saying we're not gonna pave any new streets this year, we just don't have to take on any more debt service to be able to do that. The solid waste collection, if you remember a couple of meetings ago, I came to you with the idea of in our contract with the waste hauler, we had a provision that it was a 4-year contract and we had the right to continue it on 1-year increments upon agreement from both parties. We determined that we were better off locking in to that same rate increase under the contract that we were having as opposed to putting it out to bid. And when you look, anybody who's out there on YouTube who lives in the county will see firsthand the fuel surcharges you're seeing on trash collection. I've talked to some people who live in the county, myself who lives in the county. My trash collection fees have gone up really high. We have a really good rate in the town of Rising Sun. So we're not really seeing as bad of a rate increase as we could have if we would have not continued the contract for another year. So that's a little subtle thing you see in the budget. Park and recreation, one of the things we have in here is on line 455 here, under dog park contributions, I'm showing 12,000 in there. And that's in line 455. If you look under dog park expense, well, I'm sorry, under capital outlay, because it would be a capital outlay here. On 475, you see 12,000 there. It's because now we have the water line by the dog park. Now we have the fire hydrant installed at the dog park, that's brand new. We now can get dog water fountains in there. But the only way we're really gonna be able to do that is try to get some contributions, because those puppies, no pun intended, are expensive. They want like 6,000, upwards of $7,000 a unit for just an approved dog water fountain compared to just a straight human fountain. It's amazing. So we're gonna try to accommodate our residents who have been saying, hey, it would be great if you had water at the dog park. But again, to try to realize that goal, we're gonna need to try to get some contributions to try to do that. So that's one of those examples. If we realize the $12,000 revenue stream coming in, that'll position us to do the $12,000 expense going out. Debt service, basically our debt service is revenue neutral, meaning we have no real estate tax going in. So the $384 and whatever, I think 36 cents that's on every property is now covering what it was intended to do, which was to provide the debt service for the street repaving. Remember when I talked about how in the world are we financing $800,000 of street repaving every couple of years? We moved a lot of that stuff off of the utility bill a couple of years ago, created the debt service to move it into the real estate tax. For some people, that's tax deductible, not for all people, because it's essentially part of your real estate tax that you pay. When it was on the utility bill, it was not tax deductible. We're now, our debt service is where that 384 is covering the debt service that we have. Now, over the next 3 or 4 years, we're gonna have some of those earlier finance projects dropping off. The 5-year cycles or 7-year cycles are coming due. So by the time we're ready to do some more street repaving in another year or two, we'll have a loan dropping off. So basically what I'm saying is we've managed to create sort of a circular, self-feeding, self-working that doesn't necessarily require you to raise real estate tax to give people paved roads and things like that. It's becoming self-sufficient, which is what our goal was. The one thing that I talked about last year that's a little difficult to deal with, this is all a new expense, is stormwater management. Real quick, stormwater management is a byproduct of the environmental folks trying to clean up the Chesapeake Bay. If you just saw the news report came out, what the blue crabs are at its lowest level. There are many who believe that's because of the water quality and a variety of other environmental things. But the state's way, and actually the EPA's way of dealing with that, is to get all the stuff that ends up on the ground, like antifreeze, oil, stones, pebbles, all kinds of stuff that just we take for granted that actually ends up out on the ground that can end up in the Chesapeake Bay. And so many years ago, they created what is called an MS4 requirement, which basically requires municipalities or local governments to have to invest in managing, tracking, and sometimes mitigating those stormwater management issues that ultimately affect the Chesapeake Bay, which ultimately affects the economy of Maryland, which then trickles down to everybody. Unfortunately, it's an unfunded mandate. There's no grant money, there's no state, government money going towards this. So 3 years ago, what I'm getting at is we didn't have, last year we were budgeted at $151,436. 2 years ago, that $151,000 was usable in the police department and public works and wherever. Now we basically, remember I keep talking about that $900,000 real estate tax? That's what I mean by the margins getting thinner, because we had to take out of that roughly $1,000 of real estate tax, we have to allocate 151 of it last year towards stormwater management. It's a new initiative and it's an unfunded mandate. Now, if you remember last year, I did a presentation on this mandate will require us by 2025 to essentially reduce our I'm going to call it the nitrogen footprint. Everybody hears all the time in the news, reduce your carbon footprint. I'm going to call it the nitrogen footprint because one of the components or elements they want to get out of the Chesapeake Bay is nitrogen. And nitrogen does come from septic systems, but it also comes from the natural stuff or the stuff that's on the ground that gets into the bay. So we are mandated under this state law to basically reduce our nitrogen footprint by 20%. Now, for clarification, what that means is when somebody builds a development, and we have people that live in Bryant's Grace, Summer Hill, Keppels Mill, all those developments, they have stormwater ponds. And those stormwater ponds are supposed to collect all that rainwater that falls on the road and all the bad stuff, hypothetically, that's on the road, whether it be road salt, antifreeze, whatever, goes into the stormwater retention pond and it's absorbed into there and the water's retained. So not only does the pond supposed to mitigate flooding, but it's also supposed to mitigate some of the bad contaminants. So when I talk about reducing our 20% footprint, if you remember back in 2014, the county sent a letter to some of our developments because they never established their homeowners association. And that was because, quite frankly, when the county was managing all this stuff in the 1990s, although they required developers to create a homeowners association, the developer never executed that at settlement. So meaning a person who lived in a development, when they went to the settlement table, they were never told that there was going to be a homeowners association. And they were never set up for whatever, a $30 a month payment or $120 a month payment, which all would have went for the upkeep of those stormwater management ponds. Well, we have an issue where the county realized nobody was updating those, they were not being done, so they tried to go to the homeowners associations and tell them they had to fix those items. There's no homeowners to do that. So now that as of 2019, we have been picked up and we are now responsible for the MS4 and not the county. What that means is that we're gonna have to pick up that expense, and we're gonna need to figure out how to do that. So when we go in and fix those ponds, that does not count to the 20% reduction, because that's an existing condition. We have to basically, and I'll give it to you this way, we would have to find new locations to make it simpler to gather water up and put it in a stormwater retention pond. And in order for us to reduce our footprint by 20%, we have to come up with about $1.3 million by that deadline of December 2025. Every 5 years, you got to reduce your footprint by 20%. It's an unfunded mandate. So the reason why there's a big difference between this year's expense of $85,000 and last year's expense is we figured that instead of trying to come up with $1.3 million in the 11th hour, that there was certain engineering stuff that had to be done to get us where we could do that. So we budgeted $60,000 in engineering expenses last year to start working towards that. We're not going to do that this year because our margins are so tight. So what I'm basically saying is we're sort of kicking that down the road, the stormwater management, but I can tell you a lot of communities are doing that. They're gearing up for what they need to do, but they're also trying to figure out where the money is going to come from for that. So that's a sort of a big albatross hanging over our neck budget-wise is that stormwater management. So emergency management, you know what that's about. We have line items that if we ever get hit with something that rises to a federal declaration of emergency management, we put the expenditures in those budget line items so that when it's time for us to apply to get that reimbursement from the state or federal government, it's all nicely organized in there. So we just have $578 as a placeholder in there to keep basically that Department 90 active. So that's where we roll out with a budget surplus of $6,074.86. Again, that's doing all the stuff you guys wanted to do in terms of trying to retain the police department, putting a new roof on the building. Our HVAC system's a disaster here. There's no secret that we're dealing with the way this building was built back in 2000. The HVAC system has been a disaster. Anyone who comes here during the day, by about 1 o'clock, it's like you're in a commercial icebox. We can't get the air conditioner to shut off because we have I'm being facetious, but we must have 15 different wall thermostats, and none of them talk to one another. And every time we bring somebody in here, we've gone through so many different vendors, you can't jury rig it anymore. And so we're looking at a $25,000, $28,000 expenditure to totally just put a whole new HVAC system, a new boiler, and a new system in here. Because otherwise, we're just paying an arm and a leg for electrical costs, because quite frankly, we actually have to run a heater sometimes while the air conditioner is running, because you just can't sit in the office, it's so cold on the second floor. So it just makes sense we're dealing with some old albatrosses, now's the time to try to execute that. So we've got a lot of stuff in our budget to move the town forward. There is some room to trim it down. If you guys take a look at it, if there's anything you'd like us to trim down, we can do that. We're not raising taxes on it. We're keeping the same. We're not raising any of our business tax, our personal property tax, our real estate tax. That's all staying the same. So our plan is to present this to you for adoption on June 9th. So if you could just look at it for the next 15 days, 20 days or so, and let us know before the June 9th meeting, we can adjust that. Going to the proprietary fund, this stuff is always pretty much self-explanatory because we spent all our money on bringing the water system up to snuff and the sewer. However, this is a little bit of a scary thing, is that the life expectancy on a wastewater treatment plant, when you start to get up around 20 years of age, that's when you start to have repairs made. And we basically opened up that plant in 2015. And here we are at 2022. Another 3 years, we're gonna be at that 10-year threshold. And we're already starting to see some wear and tear on equipment that we need to be replacing. One of them is, and again, this all goes back to when we were building the sewer plant. We knew the sticker shock was going to be big on our residents, so we tried to do what we could to get something efficient, effective. It's paid off. As I've said before, we're getting operator grants from MDE every year for like $34,000 in change, which basically what MDE is doing is saying that if your treatment plant is treating it what it's designed, they give you some money. And if it's treated above and beyond that, they will give you more. We're treating above and beyond. Our wastewater treatment plant is doing really good, but we're really starting to show some wear and tear. One of the wear and tears we have is we have basically 2 pumps that move the water through the wastewater treatment plant. We really should have a 3rd pump as a backup for that. Because if one goes down and you have a lot of flow coming in, we could really start to have a problem with treatment, which could mean we could hypothetically not get the grant money, because we could have areas where we're not treating to the efficiency that we need to be treating at. So we need to move that stuff around in the plant, so it makes sense to have a backup pump. That backup pump is 25?
40,000.
40,000. It's $40,000 for that backup pump. We have some other things, and Augie, you remember this, that nightmare of the auger system? Well, that was rigged from the get-go, because we had problems with the engineering design at that point. We had to do sort of a hybrid. The wear and tear on that thing is reached a point where we have to do some repairs on that. I will also say that we're gonna look very strongly into the operation of the plant, because we're starting to see some wear and tear on the plant that we just think our third-party operator should be paying a little bit closer attention to. So that was all part of the model of having the Public Works Department come under Judy as the Assistant Town Administrator, so she can manage that, and she's already, got her hands in all of that stuff, and we're gonna be moving forward with probably putting the operator out to bid, which we're hopeful that operating cost will come down, and it will improve our margins in there. Again, our budgets are always done on a worst-case scenario, so we have some room for flexibility. On the water side, we have all the same stuff we always have in there, your normal wear and tear, fixing water line breaks. There's no, the only capital expense we're showing in there is it is embarrassing to drive by Diddy Richards Park and see the one building with the roof caved in on it and the other building looking really bad. So we are moving forward with trying to get those things done. The good thing is we have such a good, well-rounded Public Works Department that we think we can do a lot of that in-house and save a significant amount of money. So our fingers are crossed on that. So when you get to the bottom of the water fund, we have a $214,462 surplus. But here's the thing I always need to remind you of. Depreciation is something that it's basically not a cash item. So we roll the depreciation out of $538,995, which creates the surplus of $214,000 of profit. But due to government accounting standards, you only have to show the interest payments on your financing in your financial documents here. As we all know, there's a principal payment. And so the idea is that your depreciation when you have it, have it in there, it offsets your principal payment. We're pretty good here. This 214,000 will cover the principal payments that we have to make on it. But when you get into the sewer side, and I'm gonna jump all the way down to the bottom, our surplus is only $123,530, which this goes back to our sewer and water rates and raising them and following that pro forma. So with all that said, I've just given you a lot of details about why things happened over the last 10 years and the benefits to that and how it benefits economically everybody in the community, but there's a cost to doing that. And so when, unfortunately, unlike other communities in Cecil County, we didn't get a huge grant from MDE or USDA to offset the cost of the sewer plant. We got $1 million grant there. That sewer plant cost us $16,000. In order to, 16 million, yeah, I wish it was 16,000. So it cost us $16 million. We paid somebody to do a pro forma, which is looking at what your rates are, what your expenses are, what your debt service is gonna be, projected out over a 10-year period, and figure out what your rate increases need to be. Well, for all the right reasons, the board is always delayed doing those rate increases to some degree. And we are behind on those rate increases. I say that every year. So this is what it comes down to. We automatically raise the rates in the February billing for the usage in January. And all of our mean and nasty rate increases have already taken place. Now we're into what you would call the cost of living increases, the inflation increases. And it's set to go up 5% every year going forward. Because you need to build up that reserve. Remember I was talking about the wastewater treatment plant, going to be 10 years into a 20-year life expectancy, and we really need to start building up a reserve fund, or we're going to be outgoing a lot of debt service again and raising people's rates 10, 15 years from now. We're going to be leaving that to future leaders of the community. So if we are in the 5% rate increases going forward, we really need to get up to where we should be. And where we should be is in February, we should raise the rate 10%. In the past, we've been raising it 14, 18, 20. We could raise it all in February of this coming year and be where we're supposed to be on the pro forma, or we could do 5%, say in July, and then 5% in February, and we'll be back financially where we need to be. So this budget is set up for the 5 and 5, 5 in July and 5 in February. Now, just to recap how this impacts us is that when you did a pro forma that talked about paying the debt service for the sewer plant, and what's our total payment is like $480,000 a year
What, for the sewer plant?
for the sewer.
It's $515,000.
$515,000 a year. When you look at what we bring in on sewer rates or sewer revenue, we're projected to bring in $991,000, I'm gonna call it $992,000. Well, hypothetically, 500,000 of that is going out the door on the debt service. And while margins are really close in there, because every year we did not raise the rate was 1 year less of collecting that higher rate on the revenue or the rate or what you were billing to come in. So it's like a double, it's like a multiplier here of when you don't raise the rate in a particular year, you might not get $50,000 of increased revenue that rate increase was supposed to do. But because you didn't do it 4 years ago, your rate now is not paying at that $50,000 that you decided not to do. So we've done a great job of trying to soften the blow for our residents over the years with the idea that development is going to come along. But I've said it over the last couple of years, we're getting really close. So what we'd like you guys to think about is, do you want to have the budget the way it is now with the 5% in July and the 5% in February? Or do you want to go into February and just raise it 10% at that time? Or the third option, which I strongly don't recommend, and I think Judy handling the finances would be, of just continuing to be 1 year behind. Because our margins are really close on that for paying our debt service on it. So that, I guess the homework assignment I need from you guys is to think about what you want to do with those sewer and water rates. If you can let me know on the June 9th budget, we'll prepare it. The way we recommend right there, the 5 and 5 is what you're looking at. That's what you have in your budget right now. So if you guys can let me know, we can deal with that for the June 9th meeting.
Thank you, Town Administrator, for that presentation. Moving forward into citizens' input, would anyone like to speak this evening? Hearing no one. Town Administrator, your report?
That's enough. I mean, I covered enough stuff. I gave you all the ins and outs.
Assistant Town Administrator?
Just very briefly, I'd like to touch base on a few things that are happening. We're going to start our roof repair shortly so that we can get that done before the rainy season continues. We also had some road projects that we're going to start tomorrow because of the rain. That has been delayed a couple of days. He wants 2 days of dry weather before he starts doing the paintings on the road. And that only makes sense. We also did, probably noticed that the pavilion has been painted. We also treated for bees and filled up all the holes for the carpenter bees. We're also going to treat it for bees again before Sunfest so that we can try to make sure that all those bees are gone before people are over there. What else that I think would be significant? I think that's probably it. Everything seems to be going along pretty well right now.
Thank you. Chief?
The only thing I have today is just a reminder for Sunfest. It's June 4th. Expect traffic delays and detours. So that'll be coming up relatively quick. And just be mindful of it. And that's all I have today.
No town attorney and no town engineer.
Okay. Moving forward into the mayor's report, I do not have a report this evening. Moving forward into commissioners' comments, Commissioner Braun.
I have no report.
Commissioner Pearson.
Just a request and a reminder, really, that you cannot block sidewalks with your cars, no matter how you park them. You cannot block a sidewalk. This is starting to happen down in Valley View with the way people are parking again. So please don't put us in a position where we're going to have to come in and really start enforcing this. Let's do it on a resident basis. That's all I have.
Thank you. Upcoming town meetings will be rescheduled. It's June 9th is our rescheduled date, correct?
That's correct.
And then we have June 28th. You can see the trash, recycling, and waste schedule, as well as the upcoming town events, which is Saturday, June the 4th, which is Sunfest from 9 a.m. till 4 p.m. Is there anything else to come before the board this evening? Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.